Good morning. As I walked around and looked at the flags, my mind reflected on an interesting story that occurred in the Bible. Most of y'all are familiar with it. It appears in the book of Ezekiel. It's a familiar story, the Valley of Dry Bones. The section I want to focus on today reads as follows. It says, "Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord." And that comes from Ezekiel, the 37th chapter, 4th verse. While I don't claim to speak with the authority of an ancient prophet, I do want to take a few minutes this morning to reanimate the lives and stories of the people who came to this space, who labored here, who sought freedom here, and to those unknown souls who died here. The first thing I want you to consider is that when the Civil War began, the vast majority of the African Americans who set foot in Nashville came here in chains. Freedom for this group would be elusive, even for those African Americans who were free before the Civil War. Despite escaping the generational curse of chattel slavery, these people occupied a position that was just above those of their enslaved brothers and sisters. This fact leads me to one of the great paradoxes of this site, and that is many of the 2,771 people who arrived here during the spring of 1862 were brought to St. Cloud Hill at the end of a bayonet. Violence, or to be clear, the fear of violence, is the thing that brought free black Nashvillians to this site in 1862. However, that same year, something unprecedented happened in the annals of Nashville's history. African Americans arrived in the city in droves, but now they came here not in chains, but they came here seeking freedom. Unlike their ancestors, people who saw Nashville as a stop before going to the deep south in chains, these people saw this area as maybe a stop that would contribute to them being free people. This is the place where African Americans first tasted freedom in its truest sense in this city. But I humbly submit to you that it was a heck of a first taste. The freedom sought at this place was often accompanied by health issues such as pneumonia, dysentery, cholera, fevers, and other diseases from which many would not recover. Ironically, for many of the brave souls that traveled here, their first real experience with freedom was to watch a loved one get sick and die. In short, death was a common feature of this space. A Union officer writing about conditions free persons in Nashville face remarked about the camps. He said, "Many of the men of this command have wives and families in some camp at Nashville. The stories that are brought me of the treatment of these people have determined me to address you this communication." One man just returned from furlough informs me that the suffering and hunger and cold is so great that these wretched people are dying by the scores, that sometimes 30 per day die and are carried by wagon loads without coffins and thrown promiscuously like brutes into a trench. But still they came. One army officer who witnessed a procession of African Americans making their way through the Middle Tennessee landscape observed, "Negroes are big and little, old and young, in color black, blue-black, and yellowish tawny, and a mixture of all combined. They are on foot. The dew has dampened the single course skirt of the negresses and their children, but not their ardor, and the dust of the road has adhered to the wet garment knee-high, giving a peculiarly expressive color to the fabric. The women invariably toil along with babies in their arms. The men and the larger boys and girls trudge past, laden with bundles of grotesque form and appearance, while the little pickaninnies mix in and patter on as would a flock of young quails in the wheat field." But the thing I want you to remember today from my remarks, the big takeaway from this moment, should be that the African Americans who arrived here, like the Africans who came to America during the Middle Passage, I want you to remember that they did not arrive here empty-handed. The way they spoke, the way they moved, the way they sang, the way they prayed, the way they loved, the way they defined freedom, the way they expressed a desire for an education, animated the life of the city in a multitude of ways. So much so that one cannot say today that they know the history of this city without engaging the history, the culture, and the memory of the people who came here during the Civil War and Reconstruction. Indeed, without their presence, Nashville could not rightfully call itself the music city of the South. It would be just another city in Tennessee. The decision of African Americans to come to this fort figures prominently in Nashville's ability to claim the mantle of the Athens of the South. As students from Fisk, Meharry, and Tennessee State, and American Baptist College, all the descendants of people who came here, compelled this city to redefine its notions of freedom, how it defined freedom. This city would not have its reputation as the Protestant Vatican had it not been for the black publishing companies that sprouted up not far from the site. These publishing companies printed and distributed the spirituals that were sang by enslaved African Americans, songs that revealed their hope and determination for the future. To be frank, Nashville would not be Nashville without the men, women, and children who came to this fort. In closing, I want you all to consider what this moment meant to us as a city, what it reveals about us. For African Americans during the war, this fort was a beacon of liberty. During Reconstruction, the presence of the Ku Klux Klan sent a message that African Americans were, for the most part, the most despised citizens of this city. For much of the 20th century, this fort stood in disrepair. It stood as a symbol of Nashville's indifference to the history of African Americans in this city. Now, as we stand in the shadow of Fort Negley, we can, as a result of the dedicated work of the staff of Fort Negley, as a result of the interest scholars of African American history at these universities in the city have paid to this fort, and as a result of the residents who grew up near this fort and shared stories about it. And finally, as a result of the descendants of the 2,771 people who labored here during the war, we can now speak about the global significance of this space. The interview between Ezekiel and God that I referenced at the beginning of this presentation concludes with this statement. It says, "Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land." It is my sincere hope that we as a city embrace the memory of the people who built and sought refuge in this fort, that we use their histories to gain a better understanding of ourselves as citizens of this city, and we continue to fight fervently for a Nashville of which we can be proud. Thank you.